Be me, Matthew, a strategy guy at a mid-sized marketing agency. Not the cool kind of agency you see in movies with slides and nap pods. Just a regular office with beige walls, flickering fluorescent lights, and coffee that tastes like disappointment. My little corner of this world consists of me, a guy named Carl, and a younger dude named Max. Carl is the head of analytics. He's probably in his late 50s, wears the same rotation of 3 different sweaters, and communicates mostly through spreadsheets. He's been with the company since it started. He doesn't talk much, but when he does, it's usually to point out a flaw in someone's logic that costs the company $1 million. Max is our graphic designer, young, quiet, ridiculously talented. He can turn a napkin sketch into a masterpiece in a few hours. He learned early on to just do his work, collect his paycheck, and avoid the office drama. We were the workhorses, the engine room. We handled the boring stuff: data analysis, media buying, market research, campaign strategy. The stuff that actually made clients money. Our work wasn't glamorous. We didn't post about it on LinkedIn. But it paid the bills. All of them. And then there was the other team. We didn't have an official name for them, but Carl once muttered the Vibe Council under his breath, and it stuck. Led by a woman named Kenzie. Kenzie was a master of words. Not the useful kind, but the corporate buzzwordy kind. She could talk for an hour without saying a single concrete thing. Everything was about synergy, authenticity, emotional resonance, and unpacking the narrative. Her second in command was Clara. Clara's main job seemed to be agreeing with Kenzie, but with more enthusiasm. If Kenzie said the sky was green, Clara would talk about how the particular shade of green was disruptive and challenged traditional color paradigms. They had a small following of other employees who saw them as the future of the company. The story really begins at a post-mortem meeting for a campaign we had just finished. It was for a boring but profitable insurance company. Carl pulled up his final slide. It was a simple graph showing a 40% increase in qualified leads and a record-breaking return on investment for the client. The client was ecstatic. They'd already signed on for a bigger contract next year. A win, right? The room was quiet for a second before Kenzie cleared her throat. She stood up, holding a tablet. She began by saying that, while the quantitative metrics were interesting, she felt we had failed on a qualitative level. According to her, our campaign lacked empathy and didn't create a safe space for the consumer. Clara jumped in, adding that our focus on ROI was a product of toxic productivity culture. She said we should be measuring success by brand wellness and community engagement. The boss, a man whose spine was made of jelly, just nodded along, looking terrified of disagreeing. He thanked Kenzie and Clara for their valuable perspective. He didn't thank us for making the company a boatload of money. I looked at Carl. He was just staring at the screen, his face completely blank. Max was doodling on a notepad, pretending he wasn't in the room. None of us said a word. What was the point? You can't argue with a religion, and their belief in vibes over results was a religion. We just packed up our laptops and went back to our desks. This was our normal. We did the work, they talked about the work. We built the house, they critiqued the color of the paint. It was annoying, but manageable, until the Titan Tools account. Sometime in the early spring, the agency landed the biggest client in its history, Titan Tools. They make professional-grade tools for contractors, mechanics, engineers, hammers, wrenches, power saws. Heavy, durable, no-nonsense stuff. Their slogan for the last 50 years was, "Built to last." They were a massive old-school company with a huge budget and a very clear identity. They wanted a full rebrand to appeal to a slightly younger generation of tradesmen without alienating their loyal, older customer base. This was our kind of project. Data-driven, clear objectives. A logical target audience. This was a Carl, Matthew, and Max special. The initial kickoff meeting was held in the big conference room. The boss started by announcing the big news, beaming like he'd landed the client himself. He then turned to me. "Matthew, I want you to take the lead on strategy for this one." Before I could even nod, Kenzie cut in. She stood up, just like she always did, and launched into a speech. She talked about how this was a pivotal moment for the agency, how a legacy brand steeped in traditional masculinity, like Titan Tools, was the perfect opportunity for radical reimagining. She said it was time to deconstruct the myth of the male-dominated workspace and open a dialogue with new audiences. It was her usual word salad, but this time it was delivered with the passion of a televangelist. The boss was completely mesmerized. The idea of being seen as progressive and forward-thinking was his ultimate weakness. Kenzie finished her speech by saying her team was uniquely positioned to handle this, and that they would deliver a campaign that was not just profitable, but culturally significant. The boss, without a moment's hesitation, completely reversed his decision. He announced that Kenzie would be the project lead. Her team would handle everything from strategy to creative. The room was silent. You could feel the air get sucked out of it. Carl, for the first time in a meeting like this, decided to speak up. He didn't raise his voice. He just spoke in his usual calm, factual tone. "Kenzie," he said, "I just want to offer a word of caution. We have preliminary data from the client. Their core demographic is extremely resistant to change. A radical shift could alienate them and jeopardize the entire account. I have the reports right here." He gestured to a thick binder on the table. Kenzie looked at him with a pitying smile. She let the silence hang in the air for a moment. Then she said it, the line that changed everything. "Okay, thanks for the mansplaining, Carl. We've got this." It was like a switch flipped. It wasn't just corporate nonsense anymore. It was a direct public personal insult. She hadn't just dismissed his data. She'd dismissed his entire 30 years of experience as an irrelevant opinion from an old man. Carl's face didn't change, but I saw his hands clench under the table. I looked at Max. He had stopped doodling and was staring at Kenzie with a look of pure disbelief. Then his eyes met mine. Then we both looked at Carl. No words were exchanged. None were needed. It was a silent, instantaneous agreement. A pact. We were done. Done trying to help. Done offering advice. Done cleaning up messes. They wanted it. They could have it. All of it. We were going to sit back and watch. The meeting ended, and the Vibe Council was ecstatic, hugging each other and talking loudly about their future plans. Our trio just walked back to our desks in silence. The first week was exactly what we expected. Kenzie's team booked the main conference room for the entire week for ideation sessions. Whenever I walked past, I'd see them sitting on beanbags, throwing a foam ball around. The whiteboard wasn't filled with market analysis or budget plans. It was covered in words like freedom, expression, community, and journey. They spent 2 full days arguing about whether the name Titan Tools was inherently aggressive. Carl had printed out all the client's research and neatly placed it on Kenzie's desk on Monday morning. By Friday, the binder hadn't moved. It was being used as a coaster for a kombucha bottle. We just kept our heads down. We had other clients, other work to do. We focused on that. We hit our deadlines. We answered our emails. But anytime someone from Kenzie's team asked us a question, our answers were polite, short, and utterly unhelpful. "Hey, Matthew, do you have any thoughts on the psychographics of Gen Z carpenters?" "I don't. All my data is with the research binder Carl gave you." "Max, could you whip up some quick logo mock-ups for us to play with?" "Sorry, I'm swamped with the Henderson account. You'll have to file a formal creative request." "Carl, what's the best way to model customer attrition?" The methodology is explained in Chapter 4 of the Analytics Guide on the company's server. We weren't being rude. We were just being literal. We gave them nothing they couldn't find themselves. We offered no expertise, no shortcuts, no guidance. We gave them the rope. The second week, the first big red flag appeared. Kenzie and Clara announced they were flying to a branding summit on the West Coast. They booked first-class tickets, 5-star hotels, and charged it all to the Titan Tools project budget. Their justification was that they needed to immerse themselves in disruptive creative energies. While they were gone, their team was supposed to be doing competitive analysis. This apparently involved them watching TikTok videos for 3 days straight. When Kenzie and Clara got back, they were inspired. They called a mandatory meeting to share their great epiphany. Their big idea was that Titan Tools shouldn't be marketing to tradesmen at all. That was the old paradigm. The new paradigm was marketing to urban millennials and Gen Z, who valued authenticity and self-expression. Their new target customer wasn't a guy who builds houses, but a guy who builds his own terrariums and posts about it on Instagram. They were going to pivot the entire brand from a symbol of rugged competence to a symbol of creative hobbies. Clara proudly announced their first big idea for a new product line, a set of artisanal, eco-friendly tools with pastel-colored handles. Max later told me he saw one of their early logo concepts on a screen. It was the classic Titan hammer, but the head was replaced with a blooming lotus flower. He had to go to the bathroom to keep from laughing out loud. It was around this time that we started a private group chat between me, Carl, and Max. It was mostly for sharing screenshots and updates on the impending disaster. It became a sort of coping mechanism, a logbook of the absurd. The third week, the client started asking questions. They had sent over a detailed questionnaire about market positioning and budget allocation. Kenzie's team ignored it for 4 days. Finally, after a semi-panicked email from the boss, they sent back a reply. It wasn't a spreadsheet or a report. It was a 20-page document filled with what they called a brand manifesto. It didn't contain a single number, not one. It was all philosophical musings about the soul of the modern craftsman and the journey of creation. Carl managed to get a copy of the client's response to the boss. It was a masterpiece of corporate politeness. Phrases like, "We're finding it difficult to see the strategic alignment," and "We would appreciate a more data-centric approach," were sprinkled throughout. It was the client equivalent of screaming, "What are you people doing?" The boss, in his infinite wisdom, forwarded the email to Kenzie with a note that said, "FYI, let's make sure we're managing client expectations." He didn't call a meeting. He didn't demand a change of course. He just delegated his own anxiety. Kenzie's response was to tell her team that the client was stuck in the past and just needed to be educated on the new vision. She saw their concern not as a warning, but as a confirmation that her ideas were just too brilliant for them to grasp immediately. The final week before the big presentation was a whirlwind of activity from her team, but it wasn't work activity, it was performance activity. They were busy designing their presentation slides to be as visually stunning as possible. They spent a whole day debating the font. They rehearsed their speeches, recorded themselves, and held peer review sessions to critique their stage presence. The actual content of the presentation was treated as an afterthought. The day before the presentation, Kenzie walked past my desk. She had this incredibly smug smile on her face. She stopped and leaned over. "Feeling nervous, Matthew?" she asked. "About what?" "About tomorrow. About seeing what a truly creative, forward-thinking campaign looks like. Might make your little spreadsheets feel a bit obsolete." I just looked up from my monitor, took a slow sip of my coffee, and said nothing. My silence seemed to bother her more than any argument would have. She scoffed and walked away. That evening, the three of us stayed a little late, wrapping up our own work. The office was quiet. Most of the Vibe Council had left early to rest their creative energies. Max looked up from his screen. "Are we really going to let this happen?" he asked. It was the first time any of us had voiced any doubt. Carl swiveled in his chair. He looked older than usual, tired. "They're not listening, Max," he said softly. "You can't help someone who doesn't want help. You just get out of the way before they pull you down with them." He was right. We had tried, Carl had tried, and he was publicly humiliated for it. My quiet attempts to inject logic into meetings had been ignored for months. Max had seen his designs get twisted into unrecognizable garbage by their feedback. We hadn't created this situation. We had just decided to stop fighting it. The day of the presentation arrived. It was a gray, rainy morning, seemed appropriate. The CEO of Titan Tools, a man named Mr. Henderson, arrived with his entire board of directors. They were all older men in sharp, conservative suits. They looked like they had just walked out of a boardroom from 1985. They did not look like guys who would be impressed by a brand manifesto. Our team wasn't invited to the presentation, but the main conference room had glass walls, so we pulled our chairs to the edge of our section, giving us a perfect silent view of the entire proceeding. It was like watching a play from the cheap seats. Kenzie and Clara were dressed in their most creative professional outfits. They were buzzing with a nervous electric energy. They started the presentation. We couldn't hear them, but we could see the slides. The first few were all vibe and no substance. Pictures of sunsets, forests, people laughing. Words like reimagine, connect, become. I could see the faces of the board members. They were polite but completely blank. Mr. Henderson, the CEO, sat at the head of the table, his hands folded, his expression unreadable. The presentation went on for what felt like an eternity. slide after slide of abstract concepts. Then came the big reveal, the new logo, the new slogan, the new campaign. Max, who was watching intently, just whispered, "Oh no, they actually did it." On the giant screen, the logo I'd heard about appeared, the Titan hammer intertwined with a delicate pastel-colored flower. Underneath it, the new slogan, not "Built to Last." The new slogan was, "Titan Tools, find your truth." I saw Mr. Henderson lean forward slightly. He didn't look angry. He looked analytical, like he was examining a faulty piece of machinery. Kenzie and Clara, oblivious, moved to the next slide. It was a mock-up of a TikTok video. A young man with dyed green hair was using a pink Titan hammer to gently tap a potted plant into a new ceramic pot. The caption read, "Building my best life with Titan tools. Self-care, Jat, plant dad." Through the glass, I could see one of the board members discreetly take his glasses off and rub the bridge of his nose. That was the first crack in the dam. Kenzie launched into the final part of her speech, her voice rising with passion. She was talking about social media engagement, influencer partnerships, and creating a brand movement. Mr. Henderson held up a single hand. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't even move. Just a simple, silent gesture. But it had the effect of a gunshot in that room. Kenzie stopped talking mid-sentence. The silence was deafening, even from where we were sitting. Mr. Henderson slowly turned his head to look at the boss. We couldn't hear his words, but his lips were easy to read. "Is this a joke?" The boss started stammering, his face turning a blotchy red. He gestured helplessly towards Kenzie. Kenzie stepped forward, a strained smile on her face. She started to say something about bold vision and thinking outside the box. Mr. Henderson's gaze shifted to her. It was utterly devoid of emotion. "Ma'am," he said, and we could just barely make out his deep voice through the glass. "We build the tools that build hospitals. We don't sell toys for children." He stood up. The rest of his board stood with him, a single fluid motion. "We have a contract that is now on the verge of being terminated for gross incompetence," he continued, his voice calm and deadly. "You will receive one final email from my office this afternoon. You will have 48 hours to provide a satisfactory response. Do not disappoint me again." And with that, he turned and walked out of the conference room. His board followed him like a row of dark-suited dominoes. They didn't look at any of us as they passed. The second the door to the elevator closed, the atmosphere in the conference room shattered. Clara burst into tears, ugly gulping sobs. Several of the junior members of their team looked like they had seen a ghost. Kenzie just stood there, completely frozen, her face as white as a sheet of paper. Her entire worldview had just been run over by a freight train of reality. And the boss went into full panic mode. He was pacing, running his hands through his already thinning hair, muttering to himself. His eyes darted around the room, looking for a life raft. And then his gaze landed on us. On me, Carl, and Max, sitting quietly at our desks. He beelined for us. He looked like a drowning man swimming towards a rock. "Matthew," he gasped, his voice cracking. "You saw that. You heard him. You have to fix this." I didn't say anything. I just looked at Carl. Carl was examining his fingernails, looking bored. Max was studiously staring at his screen. We were a wall of indifference. "Please," the boss begged. His voice was getting high-pitched. "I'll do anything. Anything you want. Just fix it." I let the silence stretch out. I wanted him to understand the depth of the hole he was in. Finally, I took a slow breath. "Anything?" I asked. "Yes, anything." I looked at Carl, then at Max. They both gave me a subtle, almost imperceptible nod. The negotiation was on. "All right," I said, my voice perfectly level. "We'll do it, but we have conditions, 4 of them, and they are not negotiable." The boss was nodding so hard I thought his head would fall off. Yes, of course, anything." "Condition number 1, I said, holding up a finger. "We get absolute total control over this project. Kenzie and her team are to be removed immediately. They are not to speak to us, email us, or even look at the project files. Their access will be revoked. We are the only authority." "Done," the boss squeaked. "Condition number 2. We want a public apology. Kenzie will write a formal letter of apology to Carl for her behavior in the kickoff meeting. That letter will be emailed to every single person in this department. I glanced at Carl. The corner of his mouth twitched. That was the equivalent of a huge grin for him. Yes, absolutely, the boss said, not even hesitating. Condition number 3. A triple bonus for me, Carl, and Max upon successful delivery of the new proposal. This bonus will be paid for out of the budget originally allocated to Kenzie's team, including the funds they spent on first-class tickets and inspiration conferences. The boss swallowed hard, but nodded. Fair. Done. And finally, I said, leaning in slightly. Condition number 4. If we save this account, I get the authority to propose a complete restructuring of the creative and strategy departments. My proposal will be implemented without changes. I get to redefine the roles, the workflow, and the performance metrics for everyone. This was the kill shot. This was about making sure this never happened again. The boss stared at me for a long second. He knew what I was asking for. It was a complete surrender of his authority. But then he looked back at the glass conference room, where Clara was still crying and Kenzie was staring into space. He looked back at me. Done, he whispered. Get it in an email, I said. All 4 conditions. I want it in writing from you and HR before we type a single word. He practically ran back to his office. 5 minutes later, the email landed in our inboxes. I forwarded it to our private chat. All right, I said, turning to Carl and Max. Let's go to work. It was like watching a perfectly rehearsed pit crew. Carl reached into the bottom drawer of his filing cabinet, the one that was always locked. He pulled out a thick, unmarked blue binder. On the front, he had written 2 words in neat block letters. Plan B. He had been preparing for this for a month. He opened it. Inside was everything the Vibe Council had ignored. Market analysis, competitor breakdowns, demographic profiles, psychographic data. A complete, logical, step-by-step strategy for a successful rebrand. Max, Carl said, sliding a section of the binder across the desk. Logo and brand identity concepts, based on themes of strength, reliability, and heritage. Get started. Max nodded, already plugging in his drawing tablet. Matthew, Carl said, turning to me. Strategy and copy. I've outlined the core messaging pillars. We need a new slogan, key campaign messages, and a media plan. Focus on trade publications, industry sponsorships, and targeted digital ads. No TikTok. On it, I said. The 3 of us worked in silence for the next few hours. The only sounds were the clicking of keyboards and Max's stylus on his tablet. There were no beanbags, no trust falls, no debates about feelings. It was pure, focused, efficient work. The rest of the office slowly filtered out, whispering and casting nervous glances our way. Kenzie and her team were called into the boss's office one by one. We saw them leave with their cardboard boxes a little while later. They didn't look at us. We worked through the night. We ordered pizza, drank terrible coffee from the machine, and built the entire campaign from the ground up. Carl was a machine, pulling data and building budget models that made perfect sense. Max was a magician. He developed a new logo, a stylized, powerful anvil with the letter T forged into it. It was modern but timeless. The color palette was charcoal, steel gray, and a deep molten orange. It was perfect. I hammered out the strategy. The core idea was simple: honor the past, build for the future. We weren't abandoning their old customers. We were celebrating them while showing the next generation why Titan was the only choice. The new slogan came to me around 3 a.m. It was simple, strong, and confident. Titan Tools, the standard. By sunrise, we had it. A complete, professional, data-backed rebranding proposal. We condensed it all into a single 5-page PDF. No fluff, just the facts. The logo, the slogan, the strategy, the budget, the projected ROI. At 9 a.m., exactly 20 hours after Mr. Henderson had walked out, I attached the PDF to an email. I sent it to him, CCing the boss. The subject line was, "Our response." And then we waited. The next hour was the longest of my life. We just sat at our desks, too tired to talk, just watching our inboxes. Then it happened. A new email notification popped up. From Robert Henderson. My heart hammered in my chest. I clicked it open. There was no greeting, no signature, just one word in the body of the email. Approved! I read it twice to make sure it was real. Then I forwarded it to Carl and Max without comment. Max let out a long, slow breath he seemed to have been holding all night. Carl closed his eyes for a moment, then opened them and gave a single, curt nod. Victory didn't feel like a party. It felt like relief. The quiet satisfaction of a difficult job done right. The fallout over the next few weeks was swift. First, the triple bonus appeared in our paychecks. It was glorious. Second, Kenzie's apology email went out. It was a masterpiece of corporate groveling, clearly written by the boss and a lawyer. It was humiliating for her, and a quiet moment of vindication for Carl. Third, as per our agreement, I submitted my proposal for the departmental restructuring. It was radical. I dissolved the Vibe Council. I rewrote every job description to focus on measurable skills and deliverables, not on vague concepts. I established a clear workflow where analytics and strategy came first, and creative followed their lead, not the other way around. The boss approved it all without a single change. He was too terrified to argue. And so, a new order was established, an order based on competence. Which brings me to the end of the story. It's been about 2 months. The new Titan campaign is a massive success. The client is thrilled. I'm now the director of strategy, my 4th condition in action. Carl is the head of the entire analytics department, with a team of his own. Max is the lead designer, with full creative control over his projects. This morning, I was walking through the newly reorganized office. It's quieter now, more focused. I stopped by a small desk in the far corner of the office, near the noisy copy machine. Kenzie was sitting there. She wasn't wearing her usual bright, creative outfits. She was in a plain gray sweater. Her new title is Data Implementation Associate. Her job, the one I designed for her, is to take the raw data from our campaign reports and manually enter it, line by line, into the company's central database. It's monotonous, detail-oriented, soul-crushing work. It's a job where feelings are irrelevant and accuracy is everything. She was staring at a giant spreadsheet, her eyes glazed over. The vibrant, confident leader was gone. In her place was just a drone. I leaned over her desk slightly. "Morning, Kenzie," I said. "How's the synergy with those data points?" She flinched, startled. She looked up at me, and for a second I saw a flicker of the old fire in her eyes, a flash of pure hatred. But it was gone in an instant, replaced by a dull, empty resignation. "It's fine, Matthew," she mumbled, looking back down at the screen. I watched her for a moment longer. I didn't feel happy. I didn't feel sad. I just felt a sense of balance, a sense of order restored. I never thought I'd get a promotion because a group of people were determined to be incompetent. But here we are. Some people build things. Others just create opportunities for those who do.